So we are live right now. Prashant sir, I think has
Prashant sir.
So Prashant sir
is in the room.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Sir, yes, fine.
Okay, sir. We'll start. A very good evening to everyone who is attending the webinar, who is watching us live. Respected our moderator for the evening, Dr. Prashant Parida sir, Assistant Professor, Department of Medical Oncology, AHPGIC Cuttack. Respected speaker for the evening, Dr. Soumya Surakhanda sir, Professor and HOD, Department of Medical Oncology, IMSN Sam Hospital, Bhubaneswar. So without any delay, we'll start the webinar, which is organized by International Association of Oncology, a webinar on advanced ovarian cancer, prolonging survival in the present decade. So, sir, it's over to you to start the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Ashish. Thank you, Ashish.
Hello, Ashish, I am audible? Ashish?
Yes, sir, you're audible. Right? Yes, sir, you're audible, sir. Right now, what we can do is we can turn our audio and video off so that sir can do the presentation and we can just start listening in the background, sir. We'll turn our audios and videos off so that no disturbances is created in the background.
So should I turn my video off or?
No. So you can, the speaker will only keep his videos on. We will
Yeah,
turn our videos and audios off.
Hello, good evening, everyone. We'll start our session today. Advanced ovarian cancer and prolonging the survival in the decade. So our speaker, today's evening speaker is Dr. Soumya Surakhanda, who doesn't need any introduction. He is the professor, head of the Department of Medical Oncology, Sam Hospital, Bhubaneswar. He has several publications, both national and international journal in his name. So we'll start the session today. Dr. Soumya, you can start now.
Thank you for a kind introduction. So today we'll be discussing on a very pertinent topic, that is the ovarian cancer. And we'll be discussing the basics. It is very difficult to cover the whole of the ovarian cancer, but we will definitely discuss certain pertinent, important aspects of the ovarian cancer that has been developed over the last few decades. So what we'll do is that we'll discuss as per the discussion, so that it will be easy for all of us. Since we learn from our patients, we'll discuss it as a case-based discussion. So this is a 21-year-old female, and she underwent an ultrasound of the abdomen pelvis, and it showed a separated adnexal mass of size of 7 into 8 centimeter. CA125 was 28, and patient underwent a laparoscopic removal of the adnexal mass. There was tumor, and the histopathology came as low-grade serous adenocarcinoma. So this is very common that we see that a 21-year-old female with a low suspicion of malignancy in her age, and she presented as separated adnexal mass, and her CA125 also was within the normal limits of less than 35, and patient underwent a laparoscopic removal of the adnexal mass, and later on it came as low-grade serous adenocarcinoma. So the learning point here is that always CA125 may not be always raised in case of ovarian cancer. So you should not get misled that the CA125 is normal. You should not get misled by the young age of the patient. And if there is a separated adnexal mass, or say any adnexal mass, so it should be always kept under suspicion that it could be malignant. So what is the most common thing that we do in such cases is the ultrasound of the abdomen. So there are some features which can distinguish between a benign versus malignant, and there is a EATO guideline for that. And in that we know that there are certain features which can help us detect that yes, it is a more of a chance of a malignant, like irregular solid tumor in the ultrasound, presence of ascites, and at least 4 papillary structures, or it is a solid component is there in the ultrasound. It is a complex cyst with solid component, and the largest diameter is more than 10 centimeter, and you have got a very strong blood flow. That is, the Doppler score is something like more than or equal to 4. And these are the features that will help us know that this adnexal mass might be a malignant one. Next is the whether we do a MRI or CT. So mostly we do a CCT of the abdominal pelvis. MRI is done in rare cases when patient is in renal failure and we still want to know and have an idea of the dissemination inside the abdominal pelvis. In that case, might be we might consider for MRI. Otherwise, mostly it is a CT scan of the abdominal pelvis. Whenever there is a history of contrast allergy or some say contraindication to the CT scan, then only we do a MRI. Otherwise, mostly it is a CCT. Regarding PET CT scan, it is not usually done in obvious cases, but yes, when there is a occult ovarian primary that we suspect, sometimes menopausal female comes with only ascites and you don't find it in the abnormality in the ultrasound of the abdomen and the CA1 antibody is raised. In that case, some patients, some physicians, they consider PET CT scan. So whenever you are searching for a occult primary, you don't know that it is obvious ovarian cancer. In such cases, there is a role for a PET CT scan. Otherwise, we stick to the standard basic investigation of CCT of the abdominal pelvis. Regarding the role of pathologist and the requirement of IHC, right now the molecular classification of the ovary is very important. We sometimes get confused with whether it is a colonic primary or whether it is a ovarian primary. In that case, CK7, CK20, CEA, WT1, they all help in stamping that it is a ovarian cancer and not a colon cancer. So these IHC are sometimes required and to distinguish from colonic primary. And sometimes we have got indications that if patients are having an endometrioid or a high-grade serous, then further molecular studies may be required for which IHC may be justified. Coming to the next slide, regarding the surgical part, still it is considered that the open surgery is the standard way to operate a ovarian cancer. Laparoscopy, multiple data on trials are there, but still when it comes to surgery in ovarian cancer, we still consider open surgery as the standard. Laparoscopic may be used in staging purposes, but when it comes to definitive surgery or definitive cytoreduction, it is a open surgery. Regarding whether it should be a primary or an interval, mostly if it is operable, then it is primary cytoreduction. But whenever there is bulky nodes or say disseminated disease, and there is a lot of ascites, and you are expecting that a R0 resection may not be feasible, in such setting, the interval cytoreduction may be considered after a round of three cycles of neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Regarding whether it has shown a survival benefit, answer is no. We have yet failed to show a survival benefit, but maybe better resection rates are possible and better R0. And whether it is a survival, extra survival is there or not, that is a debatable area, but definitely you can get a better R0. Now coming to surgery in young age female, we face sometimes like the case that we saw, whether a fertility preserving surgery should be done or not. So again, a debatable area. It is a case to case selection is done. Every case is not viewed in the same way. So it has to be a personalized decision when we are considering for a fertility preserving surgery, or sometimes in stage 1A, we do consider for a fertility preserving and then complete family. And if it is high grade, then operate later. Regarding retroperitoneal lymph node dissection, again, RPL-ND is a bit of controversy. Suppose say imaging wise node negative, whether to do RPL-ND or not. Again, there is an area of debate. We had a negative paper recently by the Lion study. This is the Lion study that showed that, and this is the result of the study. Suppose you do a lymphadenectomy, you don't do a lymphadenectomy, there was no PFS and OS benefit. However, this is not the only negative study. There are multiple studies that have negated this trial. So that is again an area of debate and yet to be finalized whether we should go or we should do a lymphadenectomy or not do a lymphadenectomy. Coming to chemotherapy, is chemotherapy a must? So yes, if it is a case of, if it is beyond stage 1C, say stage 2, stage 3, chemotherapy is a must. And stage 1A and 1B, again, debatable. So there are some high risk features, like say clear cell histology. Any stage you have to give chemotherapy. Though again, there is some apprehension that clear cell histology is itself a resistant variety. You may not get a benefit of chemotherapy, but still most of the medical oncology physicians that do give chemotherapy when it comes to clear cell histology. And when it is a grade 3 tumor, irrespective of stage, we do consider giving chemotherapy. Regarding number of cycles, so there was a trial looking into that. So standard what we practice is 6 cycles. We can consider for a minimum of 3 cycles in selected subset of stage 1B, and where we want to cut down on the toxicity part, we may cut down to 3 cycles. But the standard of otherwise in all other stages, we go for 6 cycles of chemotherapy. Regarding what chemotherapy, we'll discuss it. Histology, does it make a difference? In mucinous histology, there is some data for Capox plus minus bevacizumab, not yet a standard. And role of adjuvant hormones, again, few papers are there, not a standard that we practice regularly. So this is a study that showed that there is a trial for Capox plus minus bevacizumab, but having said that, it is not the standard of care in mucinous histology. There is data for that. Regarding adjuvant hormone therapy, again, both letrozole and tamoxifen data is there, but that is again not a routine thing that we practice daily. Regarding completing the early stage, now we move on to the advanced stage ovarian cancer. This is a 45-year-old female presenting with pain and right ovarian mass, and biopsy was done, which showed a poorly differentiated serous tumor. C1 pre-op was 78, and patient underwent a standard primary cytoreduction surgery. Bilateral ovarian tumor was found, nodular omentum and 1.5 centimeter paracecal mass was removed, and a 5 into 3 centimeter aortocaval mass was partially dissected. So it was a R1 surgery. You had got a gross macroscopic disease left out, and a residual 1.9 centimeter disease was there remaining between the aorta and the IVC. And histology, it was a grade 3 serous carcinoma of ovary with disease in the omentum, peritoneum, and R2 surgery, and lymph nodes. Wasins was positive. So this is again a very advanced ovarian cancer that has undergone a surgery. These are residual paraortic lymph nodes that are seen in the CT scan films. And so what is the treatment plan for this patient? No, actual treatment plan, paclitaxel and carboplatin into 6 cycles, but patient developed an allergic reaction to paclitaxel after second cycles. So we continued with single agent carboplatin. So the question is that, can we avoid paclitaxel? So there is data from ICON 3 that between paclitaxel and carboplatin is the most active agent, and in that trial, paclicarbo versus carbo, the carbo showed equivalent result. However, having said that, there are a lot of controversies and fallacies in the trial that is always discussed in the meetings. So if you ask us, then standard is paclicarbo, but in some cases, if paclitaxel we are not able to deliver, giving single agent carboplatin is always an option. So suppose say paclitaxel and paclitaxel allergy is there, whether we can replace it by docetaxel and carboplatin. Answer is that yes, there are trials looking into that. Docetaxel and carboplatin can be given in setting where there is extensive neuropathy or allergy. You can try for docetaxel carboplatin, keeping in mind that myelosuppression is a issue in there. So whether any role of bevacizumab in first line, should we add bevacizumab here? Again, it is a controversial area. GOG 218 and ICON 7, they had PFS benefit. When it came to OS, there was no OS benefit. In selected subset of patients, like say stage 3 with more than 1 centimeter residual disease at the end of surgery, it is an inoperable stage 3, or say stage 4 and there is only pleural effusion and it has disappeared post neoadjuvant chemotherapy and surgery was done. So stage 4, sometimes you have got selected subset of patients that do good. Suppose say one single supraclavian node, or say only pleural effusion without any liver or lung metastasis or brain mets anywhere else. So in some subset, if you give neoadjuvant chemotherapy, there might be a very good response, and in selected subset of patients, you can add bevacizumab. There is option for us. And role of intraperitoneal chemotherapy. So we are always concerned about the toxicity. If we look at the data that was made for infusing a high concentration of anti-cancer drugs, and that is the reason that intraperitoneal chemotherapy came into ovarian cancer. It is an option in adjuvant setting when the volume of residual disease is less than 1 centimeter. So here we had a residual disease more than 1 centimeter. Probably this is not the ideal case for a intraperitoneal chemotherapy, but whenever you have got a good primary cytoreduction in an advanced stage of ovarian cancer, option of intraperitoneal chemotherapy is there. So if we look at the trials, there was the SWOG study, the GOG 114 and the GOG 172. So there was an NCCN alert during that time that intraperitoneal chemotherapy showed a survival benefit. And if you look at the OS and the PFS, the hazard ratios are something like 0.80 and 0.75 in the GOG172. So yes, there is a data for that, but most of the medical organizations are concerned about the toxicity part. So 40% had to discontinue the trial, and that is the reason that it is not widely practiced, though the data is there for the intraperitoneal chemotherapy. So would you like to order any more investigation molecular test for these patients? So we know that BRCA testing can be done, and we would all probably like to do a BRCA test. And what could be the major reasons that we don't do in some patients? That is because we sometimes feel that, and patients do that. They also feel that the earlier indications like patients, young patient with ovarian cancer, family history of ovarian cancer, that was there earlier, but right now the indication has changed. All ovarian cancer go for a BRCA testing. So that is the recent guidelines. But definitely we keep in mind that the drug, they cannot afford the drug. What will we do with the test? That can cause anxiety among the families. So besides the fitting the bill, there are others like patients, they themselves reluctant to expose their families to the burden of knowledge of genetic risk. They will not be able to afford the drug. So if BRCA is positive, they will not be able to purchase the drug. So what is the use of the getting it tested? And other factors are there. The physician might feel that, no, I'm not very convinced about the data of the Lynparza or say olaparib or belaparib or niraparib. So other thing is that whether to go with the testing from the germline, that is the blood, or to do it on a tumor test on the paraffin block, so that we can get the results, both the germline and the somatic, by doing a tumor test. So earlier it was germline. Slowly and slowly among the medical fraternity, it is shifting towards the tumor BRCA, so that you can identify both the somatic and germline BRCA more. And if it is positive, then you can subject the patient family and counsel the patient family for the germline. So yes, this is a ongoing and area under evolution, that whether to do a germline BRCA first or a somatic BRCA. But definitely the right now the data is that tumor BRCA is more beneficial. So coming to next slide, BRCA is negative. So would you still like to go beyond BRCA while ordering a molecular test? So beyond BRCA, you can also, the patients benefit with PARP inhibitors when they have got a HRD, homologous recombination deficiency genes. So besides the BRCA, there are other HRD deficiency genes which can benefit with the PARP inhibitors. So patients, out of all high-grade serous ovarian cancer, nearly 50% have got HRD positive. Out of them, 25% is a BRCA, and other 25% is not associated with BRCA. So those 25% which are wild type BRCA but HRD deficient, they also benefit with PARP inhibitors. Then how to do the HRD testing? So there is a gene panel, that is the HRR gene panel, that looks for the cause of the HRD, and you can look at the particular genes, and or else you can look at the genomic instability part, the effect of the HRD. So either the DNA repair or the DNA damage can be looked at, or you can look at the genes. So there are multiple ways to look into that. One of them is Myriad MyChoice. The other is the foundation gene. So Myriad MyChoice HRD score that combines three things. One is loss of heterozygosity, another is telomeric allelic imbalance, and another is large scale state transitions. So they can find out, along with the BRCA1 and 2, they can find out the other HRD deficiency is there or not, and whether patients are likely to benefit. And how to do the scoring? So there is a DNA scar. There is a cutoff for that. Again, that cutoff has been dynamic. Earlier it was a different value. Now it has been fixed to 42. So if the score is more than 42, then there is genomic instability caused by HRD. And if it is less than 42, then we ticket that no, there is no signs of HRD. So more than 42, the patients are likely to benefit with the PARP inhibitor. Besides the Myriad score, you have got foundation gene that is looking into the HRD deficiency as well. And this was the Paula-1 trial that showed that olaparib plus bevacizumab can be given as a maintenance in HRD positive subset. So these patients who have got a BRCA mutated or say HRD deficiency, BRCA is a part of the HRD, so HRD deficiency but wild type BRCA, they still did benefit with the combination of olaparib and bevacizumab instead of PARP inhibitor alone. Our patient, BRCA was negative, did not afford HRD, and patient was given only carboplatin because he had a paclitaxel allergy. And after 10-12 months, he had abdominal pain, and on CT scan, they showed that 2.3 cm mass at porta hepatis and a 1.3 cm aortocaval node. And CA125 was again rising to 726, and biopsy was shown high-grade carcinoma. We don't do regularly biopsy, so but somehow the patient had already undergone a biopsy earlier. So what will be your treatment scheme for this patient? So it is we look at when the patient relapses, we look at that whether the patient is platinum sensitive or platinum resistant. So that is the definition. If more than 6 months, the relapse is more than 6 months from the last dose of chemotherapy or platinum exposure, then the patients are platinum sensitive. And those who are they are relapsing within the 6 months, they are platinum resistant. That is how we define that. For the platinum sensitive, there is data that if you give chemotherapy plus addition of the anti-angiogenesis bevacizumab, we are discussing only bevacizumab because of the paucity of time. We cannot go to the other anti-angiogenic drugs used in ovarian cancer. So in those settings, in this particular OCEAN trial showed that platinum sensitive relapse, if you add chemo plus bevacizumab, in this case particularly gemcitabine carboplatin plus bevacizumab, they do better than gemcitabine carboplatin plus placebo. There is a role for bevacizumab or anti-angiogenesis. So coming back to the patient received here lipodox plus carboplatin as per the Calypso trial, and a patient was exposed. So there is another question that if patient has received bevacizumab in the upfront, then whether now we should add bevacizumab in the second line. This is the MANGO trial. It is looking into that, MANGO OV2 and the MITO16. These are the patients who have received frontline chemotherapy plus bevacizumab, and they are recurring, and whether to give them the pegylated lipodox or gemcitabine or paclitaxel carboplatin and bevacizumab. So this is bevacizumab re-challenge after the exposure of bevacizumab earlier. So the data is still awaited. And for this patient, our patient received the lipodox and carbo, and after 8 months of again the patient relapsed, and TCA100 rising to 930, and CT scan again showing multiple new peritoneal disease, mediastinal nodes, and abdominopelvic nodal. So this is the second relapse. First relapse, lipodox and carbo. We discussed about Gem-Carbo-Bev, the OCEAN trial, and now again patient has relapsed. And so what will be the preferred treatment plan? The patient already exposed to lipodox and carbo, but patient is having a platinum sensitive relapse, considering that the duration is more than 6 months. In this patient received gemcitabine carboplatin plus bevacizumab for 6 cycles, followed by maintenance bevacizumab. So this is, suppose the patient would have relapsed within a duration of 6 months, then there is still a data that platinum resistant cases, you can still expose them to bevacizumab. That is the Aurelia study. So platinum, many physicians, they consider that the hazard ratios of the Aurelia, or say the responses of Aurelia study to bevacizumab is better than the platinum sensitive relapse. I do believe in them as well. So when it comes to platinum resistant relapse, definitely there is data for addition of bevacizumab to your chemotherapy backbone. And especially if you have got a ascites, then definitely the patients, they respond well to addition of bevacizumab compared to patients who are platinum sensitive and without ascites. So I think that the ovarian cancer is a very big topic. It will be very difficult to cover all of the whole of the ovarian cancer on a single day. So I conclude my talk with this last platinum resistant relapse. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for such an informative talk, sir. And now I'd like to request moderator Dr. Prashant Parida, sir, to ask a few questions from the chat box. Sir, over to you. Sir, your audio isn't coming, sir. Sir, your audio isn't on. Could you please turn on the audio? Not audible, sir. Not audible. No, sir, it isn't audible yet. Sir, the audio button is besides the video button on the top only. Isn't audible, sir, yet.
Meanwhile, I can take up the questions if you can read out if it is visible to you, and Dr. Prashant can meanwhile see the audio setting on the top. or also we can wait for a question.
Yeah, sir, I'll read out. Sir, I can read out a few questions that are marked. So there's one question, sir, which says alkaline foods and liquids are effective or not to reduce cancer cells.
So actually, there are multiple hypotheses on that part. So alkaline, many people they do propose that, and but definitely a phase 3 randomized trial or say well published in a well published journal, I think that data is lacking, and until and unless we have proof for the hypothesis being proved on real patients, definitely I don't think that we have got sufficient yet to support that, to tell that no alkaline food will make an impact. But yes, a multiple hypothesis is there, and we would be glad that if it could be proved on a prospective trial.
Sir, there's one more question, that what is the reason to occur mutation in BRCA1 gene?
Yeah, so there are multiple triggers for a mutation. So few of them is a radiation exposure and previous chemotherapy if they have been exposed. But particularly with regards to BRCA mutation, definitely we do not have an answer to that why BRCA is happening. Though we know that it is one of the hereditary causes of the ovarian cancer. But as regards to why a particular mutation occurs, that is the BRCA mutation, we definitely do not have a evidence-based answer to that. But we know that genomic instability is one of the important component of ovarian cancer, or say cause of cancer. But definitely a particular why that particular BRCA is there or mutation is there, there is no answer to that question as of yet.
So one more question.
Ashish?
Yeah, it is audible, sir.
Yes.
It is audible.
So, thank you, Soumya. Thank you very much for your excellent deliberation. So, in a nutshell, ovarian carcinoma, most of the patients, almost 75% of patients, they present with very vague symptoms. Therefore, almost 75% of patients they are diagnosed in a very advanced stage. These vague symptoms are abdominal discomfort, bloating, and urinary frequency. So, if someone presents with this, she can think of having ovarian carcinoma, so she should consult a physician. And in the early stage, if it is operable, then she should undergo surgery. Ovarian carcinoma, we usually do surgical staging followed by adjuvant chemotherapy, and the standard adjuvant chemotherapy is paclitaxel plus carboplatin. And in the recurrent setting, we have a lot of therapies, including cytotoxic agents and targeted agents like bevacizumab and the PARP inhibitors like olaparib, ineparib, and niraparib. Already Dr. Soumya has described very well. So we have very few questions have been asked in the chat session, in the chat. So one of the important question here, we will take only relevant question regarding the ovarian carcinoma. So the first question, so this question, though it is not related to ovarian carcinoma, asked by Ridip Tamoli. My father taken chemotherapy, but he have to go for treatment, but due to lockdown, he cannot taken in further chemotherapy. So now he's having throat pain. So regarding this question, Mr. Ridip Tamoli, though due to you have what type of cancer your father is suffering, you have not mentioned. So if he is not able to take, he has not taken any form of chemotherapy, you can consult your physician. So even for we have some several alternative form of oral chemotherapeutic agents also. So that can be advised. So it is not always required to attend the hospital also. So he can take oral chemotherapy staying in at home also. Next question. Asked by Ankita Das. Can oral contraceptive pill lead to hypomenorrhea? Dr. Soumya, it is asked by Ankita Das.
Yeah, so what happened earlier is that oral contraceptive pills was looked at suspicion in breast cancer, especially when the high estrogen content oral pills were available. But right now, whatever the OCPs are available, most of them have got a very low estrogen content, more for a breast cancer and rather than ovarian cancer. But so for a long term, if you take a high estrogen containing OCP, it might be might have a high risk factor. But presently, whatever available in the market, they've got very low estrogen content, and there is no direct proof to say that those can increase your chances of getting an ovarian cancer.
Okay, thank you. So next question is Royal Almasen. He has asked, generally other than the usually treatment regimen, what else can a patient should do in order to avoid ovarian new growth in the second time around? So the meaning of this question is, suppose someone has suffered from ovarian cancer, instead of taking chemotherapy regimen, what alternative can be taken for recurrence or second time growth of ovarian cancer? Dr. Soumya.
Can you repeat the question again, please?
Okay, I am simplifying that question. Probably, though it is not clear from that question, someone has suffered from ovarian cancer. Initially, he has taken some form of chemotherapy, adjuvant chemotherapy, and part of the alternative therapy we have, so that instead of chemotherapy, that can be taken to avoid the recurrence. Actually,
So
there are no such.
Yeah, scientifically, no alternative therapy has proven to decrease the relapse rate, but definitely going frequently means the patients are on active surveillance to physicians. Those who come regularly for checking to the physician and monitoring your CA-125, and if there is a strategy of maintenance therapy that you are on, suppose say olaparib or bevacizumab, that can decrease or say lag your relapse a bit. So suppose someone is BRCA positive and he or she is taking olaparib or say beliparib or niraparib, so they can have a late relapse. And those who are on bevacizumab in a high grade setting, means in a advanced stage, they might have a But besides your maintenance strategies, besides your active surveillance, no other alternative modalities has shown to prevent your relapse or say delay your relapse.
Yes. So Ralian, probably you have understood that we have several maintenance form of therapy, including oral therapies like olaparib, niraparib, and beliparib recently approved. So, or even bevacizumab, which is an anti-angiogenic targeted therapy. So that can be taken as maintenance therapy to prolong the PFS, but there are no such alternative options, so that we can avoid completely any form of therapy. Thank you so much. So next question asked by Rajsekhar Saha. What can a female do to avoid occurring ovarian cancer, and what are the symptoms that she should check? We have already discussed. So if someone she has asked a female do to avoid, so you cannot avoid. For example, someone is having familiar or hereditary. So in that case, frequent monitoring or screening is required from the early age. So by that, we will detect that malignant ovarian cancer in the early stage. We can treat that patient. But there are no such therapies available so that we can completely prevent. But we can detect early. Though in a large population, the screening methods, whatever screening methods have been used, including ultrasound, transvaginal vaginal ultrasound, CA-125, several scores has been used, but it is not yet fruitful in general public. But in high-risk populations like hereditary breast ovarian syndrome, like BRCA1 or BRCA2 positive cases, in that cases, you can do a screening from early age so that we can detect this ovarian cancer in early stage so that we can treat. Next question. One question asked by Sayani Banerjee. Sayani Banerjee, can PCOS lead to ovarian cancer, polycystic ovarian disease? Dr. Soumya.
So hyperstimulation syndromes. Suppose a patient is on clomiphene for a long time, or say patient is nulliparous, and in such settings, definitely patient can have a higher risk for ovarian cancer. But as such, PCOS is not been proven to cause a higher risk for ovarian cancer.
The same question has been asked by another participant. It is any informative. May I know how PCOS can lead to ovarian cancer? So it has been already been answered. Next question. Dr. Sonia Thomas asked, ovarian cancer can occur by the large use of anti-pregnancy tablets or not? Dr. Sonia.
Again, I think we have discussed on that, but anti-pregnancy tablet means the oral contraceptive pills. So as such, you need not fear on that, because the earlier whatever it was available, it was mostly high estrogen content, and that too, breast cancer was on the radar. But the OCP is causing ovarian cancer again. But definitely nulliparity and use of clomiphene citrate and all those can be a part of it.
Yes. So actually, ovarian cancer, in fact, is protective. If someone is taking OCP, then it has been seen that it is protective against ovarian cancer. But if someone has taken only estrogen replacement therapy, that can pose a risk. But as such, OCP is not a risk factor. Another question asked by Anu Panchal: if cancer cells are not present in cells, but lymph nodes are remain quite enlargement, so for that there is need for chemotherapy or other treatment. Dr. Soumya.
Can you please clarify my question? If cancer cells
if cancer cells are not present in cells, but lymph nodes are remain quite enlargement, I am simplifying that. If someone is having only node enlargement, but it is not due to cancer, whether he or she needs chemotherapy or not. If we have several infective or inflammatory conditions where you can get lymph node enlargement, even tuberculosis, sarcoidosis, several infective conditions, oral infection, gum infection, tonsillitis, that can lead to enlargement of nodes, but these are called reactive nodes. So these reactive nodes are not always cancer, so they doesn't need any form of chemotherapy. But if someone is having persistent enlargement of node or pathological node, but that should be examined, or they should need biopsy to be done to confirm the diagnosis. Next question asked by Sud Khan. Is it possible to overcome ovarian cancer from third stage? And Dr. Soumya, is it possible to overcome ovarian cancer from third stage?
What I understand from the overcome, what is a cure? Suppose the patient is a part of the means he is a curative intent or not. Answer is yes. Even in stage 3, you have got patients who can be cured of ovarian cancer. The percentage depends on the whether it is a 3A, 3B, or 3C, and it is something close to something like 30% to 35% patients can be cured even in stage 3. 3A, 3B, and 3C. So if it is 3C, something like 25 to 30, and if it is something like 3B, it becomes 35. So if 3A, something like close to 35, 40. So it depends on the 3A or 3B. It is a dismal rate, but definitely you should not be hopeless that it is patient cannot be cured. The chance of getting a cure is still present in a stage 3 ovarian cancer, and so you should be aiming at the best of the treatment possible.
So I want to mention one thing here. That almost several participants, they have asked several questions, but those are not relevant to this topic. We will not discuss today. But next question asked by Srishti Raja: can ovarian cancer survivor feed their newborns? Can survivor of ovarian cancer feed their newborns?
Yeah, Yeah, they can feed their newborns. So a patient on active chemotherapy can better avoid who are on active chemotherapy. They can avoid feeding their newborns. But otherwise, patient who is already a survivor of ovarian cancer, as your question is, definitely then they can go ahead and feed their newborn.
Yes, yes. So next question asked by Samuel Hawk. Is there any limit of taking OC pill for a normal healthy person so that she does not suffer from any carcinogenic effect?
Yeah, I can answer that.
Is there any limit for taking oral contraceptive pill for a normal person so that she does not suffer from any carcinogenic effect? So, Samuel, Mr. Samuel, OC pill, as we have already discussed, it is somewhat protective for ovarian cancer, though slightly increased risk for breast cancer, but OC pill is not a risk factor for ovarian cancer. Next question. Asked by Jebin Sultana, what is the difference between ovarian cancer and an ovarian cyst? Soumya, what is the difference between an ovarian cancer and ovarian cyst?
So that is what I told you in the first of my slide, that you need to do a ultrasound, then characterize. There is a classification known as IOTA classification. IOTA, the International Ovarian Tumor Analysis Association, IOTA. So they have classified that suppose the cyst size is more than 10 centimeter, there is solid component in the cyst in the ultrasound, and there are more than 4 papilla. There is irregular border, presence of ascites, and in the ultrasound there is a lot of blood flow. So what we tell it as a Doppler score of 4. So in that case, then you must be a little bit. You can go that it might be malignant, and you need to see an oncologist. Otherwise, females may have a luteal cyst and may have a chocolate cyst, may have other kinds of cyst in the ovary, which can be there present and which is benign. So you need not worry for all the cysts that is found in the ultrasound if you have got one.
Okay, sir. So, sir, is there any more questions left, or can we conclude this, sir?
Yes, because we have covered almost all the questions, relevant questions.
Yes,
thank
sir.
you, Sam. Thank you for participating and answering very well all those questions. Though some of them are relevant to this session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
We can conclude now. Almost we have done.
Sir, if you give me 2 minutes, I'll just make an announcement and we'll conclude, sir.
Yes.
So thank you to Dr. Prashant. Thank you to Dr. Prashant Parida, sir, for moderating such a beautiful question and answer round. Thank you to Dr. Soumya Surat Panda, sir, for such an informative and knowledgeable session. We are sure that the attendees must have learned a lot from this webinar. So to all the attendees who are watching us live, we have sent you the details of how you can go and access your certificate on the International Association of Oncology dashboard. It's right on the top of the chat box. You all can use those steps. You can follow those steps to enter into the IO dashboard, and you can get your certificates right there. And for all the attendees who have registered for this webinar, you will all receive a mail in your mailbox wherein you will get all the links for downloading the certificate, giving your feedbacks, and the registration links for the next webinars as well. Thank you everyone. I would like to thank our speaker again, Dr. Soumya Surat Panda, sir, and our moderator, Dr. Prashant Parida, sir, for such a beautiful session. And we assure you all that we'll be coming again with different webinars and with different interesting topics in the future as well. Thank you so much, sir. And it was great having a webinar with you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, sir.